So my first question is, what makes focusing oriented therapy different than working with a focusing professional who isn't a therapist? And I'm thinking in particular, like people who are trainers and certified focusing professionals, but also people who have another embodiment practice. There's some of my students are yoga teachers or Pilates teachers, and I've had conversations with people who are chiropractors. There's all these different modalities that are embodied or that are healing, and people are wanting to cross focusing in, and they're not necessarily therapists. And so I'm curious how you see focusing oriented therapy different than focusing with a professional.
That's a wonderful question. It's actually
when I tell students sometimes when they come and if they are therapists, I say, oh, well, you need to know about focusing oriented therapy, that, you might want to go train with them. And I don't really know what they do because I'm not done that training. But yeah, it comes from that too.
So you yourself haven't been in therapy?
I've been in therapy, but I haven't trained as a focusing oriented therapist because I'm not a therapist, and I haven't done training that I think is FOT.
So you've been on the receiving end of a focusing oriented therapy, but not on the end of being the therapist.
Yeah, the training end and the supervision and all the things that go into that.
Yeah.
I know formally you write a paper and you study certain things, certain readings. There's a whole body of work that can happen. But I'm more curious about how you think it changes maybe the interaction or the holding of the space, or something more about the process, how is focusing when it's FOT versus more broadly with a focusing professional.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say that question back in this way that you're saying it now. That how is the interaction different when the person is committed to being a therapist and has therapy training than in another kind of focusing, helping relationship? Well, one thing I want to say is how it's the same first.
Okay.
I think it's the same in the sense that what Jean calls the big therapy process, and we're talking about that in my therapy class, and there are clips of that class on YouTube, so you can kind of see what what people are learning there. Okay. And it won't surprise you. It'll be pretty familiar to you. But the big therapy process is a process by which the interaction of the two people is held in this large evolutionary process. And there's a sense of momentum and movement of each little step opening to the larger, and the person feeling more and more themselves as they go along. And the growth and the development that we really are made of, that we are this carrying forward process. But we're aware of it and participating consciously in it, in focusing, and of course in focusing oriented therapy. So one doesn't have to be a therapist or be in therapy for this large process to happen.
Yeah.
But a therapist is trained and committed to studying and intending and being for, what Jean says, to be the interaction that makes a change, that makes something better, so that it's not that I'm guiding the person, or intervening, or only interpreting or helping them slow down. All those things are important. But the therapy process is an awareness that your way of being, your attitudes, your contact is in the service of something very sacred, big, important. And the client is also aware of that. The client is thinking, well, people use therapy for all kinds of things, but when the person is aware of what therapy is, the person is feeling, I want to get the most of this connection. And this is important to me. My therapist is this special person. And a therapist is someone who is willing to be that special person, willing to be for the other in ways that you're, as a therapist, I'm larger than myself. I'm representing a lot for the client. I can be representing something like the good mother, or I could be representing the helpless parent that doesn't know what to do, or millions of different things. And so I'm aware that it's me, and I'm a very particular person, and I'm always part of it. It's not transference or projection only, right? But that we're aware that I'm also willing to represent stuff and taking it on.
Right.
So if my client is terribly, terribly hurt that I have to plug in my iPad in the middle of a session or something like that, there may be some little child part of me that says, but it was only a minute, and you had to do it last week. But the therapist part of me is going to say, that was a terrible interruption. You felt let down, let go of. And I'm feeling into the deeper experience for the client. And the way Jean puts it is that I'm on its side, not, it doesn't mean that I always take the side of the client, and the way Jean puts it is that I'm on its side, not, it doesn't mean that I always take the side of the client, in everything, but its side is that one in there, right? And that one, I want it to speak to me. I want it to speak in a way that it can't speak to other people, right, that maybe our teachers or something like that. In my therapy class, I played the students Bob Dylan's song about "It Ain't Me, Babe." You want someone to open each and every door, to lay down their life for you, to take, and Bob Dylan is saying, "It ain't me, babe." And I was saying to the class, what kind of profession is this where the therapist says, yeah, it's me, babe. You can expect all that. It doesn't mean I can do it, right? It doesn't mean that I'm going to do it, but you can expect it, and I can want to do it. And I can be on its side when it's disappointed and I'm not doing it. then we can get to know its desire. We can carry it forward in that relationship where we're both on its side. You know, we're both trying to be for that one in there. One more thing I'll say about it, and then we'll get to the other question.
Yep.
I love this quote of Jean's where he says, the client may be writing a message in an unknown language, in invisible ink, and putting it in the ocean without even a bottle, and nobody could get that message. But you, as the therapist, have to get that message.
Mm.
And I love that, because it becomes, there's an acknowledgement that of course we can't, but the wanting to is a big, the seeking it. So the wanting to know it's a deep faith in that developmental process and the carrying forward, and that things that seem so self-defeating and problematic in the person's life is a way of something trying to come into its own in some kind of way, and we have to know what that is and work with it and care about it and see it.
Yeah, beautiful.
I want to see how what I said, how that
Yeah.
fits for you.
Yeah, I definitely don't feel like that happens very often, that I feel like I'm representing a role that I'm mostly co-regulating, I'm holding space, and that's helping the process carry forward. But it's, yeah, I don't, yeah, that resonates. That's something I don't do.
Well, I don't know if it's not that you don't do it, but it's not what the agreement is. In other words, people are seeing you as the representative of somebody that's holding space, maybe when space had never been held for them before, but you aren't working with that being a representative.
Yeah. And then the other thing that came was that I know that in certain focusing exchanges, sometimes we do have a process check, right? Like, how was that process for you? And so that feedback can be part of it, but isn't always part of it. And so, yeah. So why isn't focusing oriented therapy and focusing more broadly better known? I have an anecdote that I want to share, and I want to read a quote of John Lynn. And he says he's building, I always don't know how to pronounce this, Husserl, the philosopher. So the original quote.
Husserl.
Sorry?
Husserl.
Husserl. The original is that any experience can be considered as universal. One need only consider it as an instance of its kind. And then Genlin says he changes it to that one can take any experience as an instance of many kinds, all of them its kind. Thing in there. And so the anecdote, and I won't share who it was, but there was somebody who said they were an FOT, and they shared that they never tell their clients that they're doing focusing with them. And I'm curious, I don't know how widespread that is, but I'm curious if part of the reason focusing isn't more well known is because focusing oriented therapists don't always tell their client, hey, we're doing focusing. And hey, this is a skill you can go take courses for. Hey, you can do that with peers, and you don't just need to do it with me. Anyway, so I'm curious if you know anything about that, if that's a common thing, and or if you have more broader thoughts about why focusing isn't more well known.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. It's a wonderful question. But I think that I want to answer it very personally.
Oh,
I met Gene Genlin when he was doing a workshop, and I was a therapist, and I asked him to be my therapist, and
okay.
um, and um, a long time went by before he told me about focusing.
Hmm.
Um, and one day he said, "Well, I do this thing called focusing, and I'd like to, share it with you if you're interested." And he didn't want to take up my time, and it was very important that the clients has this open space to do and is not imposed on by the agenda of the therapist.
Yeah.
But he didn't really tell me about the trainings going on and all of that until I was asking about it and curious about it. So I think that the client-centered tradition that Gene is embedded in is very careful about not imposing things on the client and responding to the client. So I think that may be one reason that therapists don't sort of announce, we're doing focusing and you can learn about it. I myself will talk about focusing, but probably as Gene did, not for a while. I certainly don't start with that unless the client asks me what orientation I have and what it means. But another, let me just focus on this question a minute.
Yeah.
This is a harder thing to say. I think that Gene's experience, both of being a philosopher and also of escaping from the Nazis as a young boy, gave him a very particular aversion to the corruption of institutionalization and what he would call groupthink. And his social political thrust that is in focusing, is inherent in focusing, is that we don't encourage people to submit to some authority. So he never wanted focusing to be something that only people trained to do it in the way he did it would be allowed to do it, even though Mary, I think, was the one that wanted certification and he went along with it. But he always said anybody can teach focusing. And if an organization isn't doing what you want, go in the kitchen and get together with a couple of people and start your own thing. And that makes it very difficult for focusing to be well known, because it's institutions that promote things and advertise them. He was not into advertising, or it's a very different mindset, and it's both one of the powers of focusing and one of the things that limits it. But I think that it popping up all over the world in so many ways, with being used for so many things, is much more it has much more of a thrust, an evolutionary thrust, than the kind of process that's well advertised and that there are very particular ways of doing it and hierarchies, and you have to pay this much money to get to this level, and then you get to that level, and
Right.
You do this training and that training. And I
Yeah.
think in the long run, focusing will always be an outlier kind of process because it is in a sense anti-establishment.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Although I was, in a way, not necessarily thinking about training and marketing, but just of the gift of knowing it's a thing. And for example, the changes groups, right? I run a
Mhm.
changes, and people can come to the changes group without any training, and they can learn from each other. Often people learn in groups of 3, or we do a little empathy circle, which we talked about at the Help for Helpers, right? So there's these ways of getting it without pain. It's not, and
Yes,
you have to
yes.
find, but you have to find out, oh, there's a thing called focusing, to find out that there's a website, and then, oh, there's changes groups, like that kind of, like, is it almost for me, it's almost like a moral or an ethical question of keeping something. So it's not pushing it, but there's a fine balance of, if you don't say it, then there's not a, I would imagine that some people would never actually know that, hey, there's so many kinds of therapy, and those are just done by therapists, and you don't do them in a peer-to-peer practice. And focusing kind of seems to be an outlier. It's like dancing. You can go and take lessons and like martial arts, like it's quite different than all the other therapies that I know of, that I don't know of any other ones where it's practiced peer-to-peer. There's other techniques that are similar to focusing, like circling or something that's a peer-to-peer practice, improv.
Mhm.
There are
Mhm.
ways we can and do things, but those aren't usually, sometimes maybe they are blended with therapy, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. And
Hmm.
Jane's intention was never to keep it. He was actually tortured by the sense that it wasn't out in the world and that it was his responsibility. And he so wanted it to be in the world. He started by having these changes groups when people were being drafted, and he was just having everybody come in. These in I guess it was the University of Chicago, and teaching them focusing, and yeah, and I think that there is a big thrust now for focusing oriented therapists to make more of a place for the uniqueness, and certainly with this new YouTube channel that we're developing, Focusing Oriented Therapies YouTube channel. That's the intention, and these questions that you're asking me is part of that effort, because we want people on TikTok or whatever to look up a question that they want to know about and see what focusing oriented therapists say about it.
Yeah.